and welcome to the latest episode of Defense Disrupted. My name's Ian, and I am very excited to be joined by my colleague, Court Vanzant. He is the newly promoted Chief Growth Officer of TurbineOne and has an extraordinary career that we're going to dig into. He's also going to either make or amplify an announcement today of some bold ventures that is really something we're all very excited about. But we're going to get into all of that and a bit of his personal background as well. Court, welcome to the podcast.
Ian, thank you. I'm ecstatic about this opportunity and excited to be here and curious about what we're going to cover.
Oh, it's gonna get crazy. It's gonna get awkward, but like in a good way. And we're gonna have a fun time with it. Trust me, it's all gonna be worth it in the end.
I have no doubt.
Let's talk about you as an individual. Let's introduce you to the world for folks who don't know you as well. You have had, well, we'll start with the work stuff. This is a work podcast talking about how national security is constantly evolving. And there have been some changes in the past month by several measures.
Have there ever?
Yeah, bit notable in American history. But let's talk about your background. So you seem to have had all sorts of fun speaking truth to power in famous companies like Accenture, I think BCG, Boston Consulting Group, I think Deloitte, although I have to check my notes. So these are famously advisory firms. So you've been teaching people how to do their job better. You wouldn't say that, but that's me having fun with what those companies do for a living, having worked for one of them myself. So looking back in just that aspect of that business function, a lot of folks in national security don't really know what those folks do. How would you reflect on your years of work in that market, particularly in national security that is famously insular, high barriers of entry, rightly so, right? So to be able to speak truth to power in places that are hard to reach, what was that like for you in your early career?
I love that question. I can truly say no one has ever quite framed that question that way. So it's refreshing. Early on, I was working in a small company that specialized in Lean Six Sigma. That company was called the George Group. They wrote literally the books that fused the speed of Lean with the defect reduction of Six Sigma, and then trained corporations, global Fortune 500 agencies and services within the U.S. Defense Department at the time, how to benefit from those two practices. So I was brought in, trained, became a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, and then coached, taught, led Kaizen events all around the U.S. and some overseas. And that was really the first chance I had out of uniform following 6 years of active duty as an Army infantry officer to step out of uniform and feel like I had potentially more impact in a business suit than I did as at the time, 03, captain infantry officer. So that was a fascinating experience as a late 20-something. And I think it speaks to the responsibility that the young consultants and managers and analysts have actually across the agencies and services they support today, because the outsized impact you can generate speaking to, at that point, colonels, generals, admirals, advising them on how to run their specific organization more efficiently, more effectively, is an extraordinary privilege. And I think with that privilege comes the extraordinarily high expectations that you do that with data, with rigor, with moral, legal, ethical, and values intact at the highest levels. And I think we've seen some examples of where perhaps those standards have not been met over the years. But I was conscious of that burden of responsibility and the outsized impact we could have at a young age, and was excited by that and felt that that was another layer of another avenue for the kinds of contributions that had caused me to raise my right hand and join the military to begin with.
Thank you for sharing that. It does sound like you had a technical expertise, in this case, Six Sigma operations, right? Efficiency, that allowed that foundation of data to be driven into larger strategic impact. That's how I think I'm reflecting that experience. While many of the big advisory firms of the world tend to be generalists, I think that's an interesting starting theme that I'm just beginning to develop as I crack the code of what makes court, because I think you have aspects of that in other parts of your career as well. You mentioned your military service, but I don't think you fully ever left. And to the extent you can share whatever is appropriate, were you completely done with the military in your early 20s, or did by chance you stay connected to that community?
I've stayed connected. I've stayed connected as a reservist in the U.S. Army Reserve, and I've been privileged to be able to work with some interesting and very impactful organizations over the last, almost 20 years. So It's been an interesting ride to be able to start the career with a very technical skill set in the Lean Six Sigma domain. And then as things do, that methodology sort of fell out of vogue and was replaced by Agile and some others. And as in the process of career managing and also following challenges to continue to create the opportunities where I could have higher impact and broader reach across the firms that I was supporting and working with and the clients we were serving, it led into different tangents and pathways over those years. And the skill sets that I had to onboard and ultimately be able to oversee and manage at scale obviously shifted, as we all do. We adapt. And I think it's been interesting to watch those adaptations manifest on my civilian career, while the reserve career has been somewhat a source of some stability, right? Common unifying, galvanizing purpose, shared esprit de corps, shared values, shared training. But the ways that those manifest are often quite different depending upon the needs of the national security context and the national strategic goals from year to year, administration to administration, right? We always say the enemy gets a vote. And when the enemy gets a vote, the US military reacts. And I've been fortunate to be in positions where we've been able to foresee some of those necessary reactions in the civilian side, plan for them, build systems to be durable enough to withstand the increasing pressure or the shifting momentum based upon real world events that are either ongoing or upcoming. And then in uniform, had the same types of responsibilities, but manifested in a different way, leading soldiers representing the US Army in interagency positions and continue to help serve the country in those capacities.
So let's talk more about that. Different uniforms. Okay. So there's the uniform in military service, active and reserve, activated. There's the uniform of civilian life, civilian culture, big businesses. But you recently made a choice to jump into startup life. You made that contrast. So let's talk about some contrasts. The contrast of lean was replaced by agile or something like that. And I was like, did it? I guess it did. I don't know. Like, there's some folks who still love it, but maybe, I mean, the popularity maybe has shifted. It always feels like there's another reinvention of some business practice. But I think in those transformations, I wanna dig into what you've seen. Is lean really that different than agile? Is big company systems integration really that different than startup? What let's dig into those. What stands out to you as perhaps the starkest contrast, the biggest mistranslations, the biggest areas where you've been able to wear two different uniforms and people on both sides are speaking different languages?
Yeah. I think I have to attack that with the first principles approach, which is, sort of central to the way my worldview. I mean, literally, what's common. I'll start with commonalities first, then maybe we can get to.
You're such a peacemaker, Cord. You're trying to bring folks together. I'm trying to get the interesting snippet here in this podcast of the biggest. Okay, fine, fine. Let's do the commonalities, but as long as you promise to get into the differences.
Yeah, the commonalities would be a data informed approach with rigorous analysis, leading to objective conclusions that are demonstrable and provable with facts. That is it. If you're following the fact patterns and you use different tools, different hypotheses to develop the fact patterns to try to simulate what happens on the best possible day and simulate what happens in the worst possible day. That was hammered into me as it is all other junior officers from course of action development in the military, the MDMP, the military decision making and mission planning process. So these are common skills. I think I've been really fortunate to apply them in different arenas. And what is different, to your point, Ian, about the different tangents and sort of pulling the tensions at the other end of the poles, the vocabulary, some of the cultural expectations are radically different. And that drives, interesting adaptations on the part of those folks that kind of walk in both worlds of uniform service and in civilian service to the national security arena.
Like what? Give me an example. What's an example of those areas that have been different? Either civilian, military that you've navigated, any stories that come to mind, or big company, small company.
Yeah, well, big companies tend to be much slower. They tend to be much more risk averse. I've been a part of 3 partnerships, not as a partner, but as a senior manager running portfolios of businesses within those companies. And it is interesting to see the risk aversion in large firms that have, in some cases, more than a century of history to draw upon. In all 3 of the cases for companies where I was fortunate to work, decades of history, decades of organizational inertia, and some calcification that means that they are less well poised to react to a rapidly changing world than is a small business, which is actually a bridge to how I came to work with you at Turbine One. watching the world as a student of geopolitics, a student of economics, and of changing technologies, in each of those three domains, the flashing red lights of massive change is upcoming. We're all blinking and the sirens are going off over the last several years. Anybody watching, the world as it's evolving in terms of the geopolitics, restructuring of wealth from nation to nation within classes inside those nations, and then the added entropy from a chemical equation perspective of technology that nobody on the planet has ever seen before, all to me signaled I need to be in an environment where I can move as fast or faster than the world is shifting around us. And frankly, I think it is a paradigm shifting moment for large companies that are asking themselves deep questions about their own structure, their own cultures, their own orientations to that opportunity. I won't call it a problem. I think it is a once in a generation opportunity. And I frankly didn't see the shifts happening fast enough. I watched actually some of the panel discussions from the World Economic Forum, which has happened in Davos. I saw the CEOs of large multinational Fortune 50 companies on stage discussing various numbers of topics. The consistent theme was changes that none of them have seen in their working professional lives. So what does that require? It changes agility. I think it requires agility that is unlike what many of us have seen in our lives. I think personally, I've been very fortunate to need to draw upon a fairly deep well of agility in my career because of the fact that I spent almost 20 years in consulting. Every engagement required something different. It was sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 6 months. Some cases I was lucky enough to serve clients for 6 years. But you were constantly needing to stay ahead of the change curve to be able to add value and perspective to the leadership decisions that you were there to help your clients make, as well as they could with as much information as they could and the highest degree of certainty, lowest degree of risk. And I think that is a different mentality than many folks have. Most folks, I think, just looking at peers and others, tend to want to seek comfort. They tend to want to seek predictability. Those two words literally give me the hives. I choose chaos. I choose wide open fields of capitalism and reinvention and innovation every time. I realized that where I was not going to give me those kinds of opportunities. So I began looking for best in breed small businesses and startups, and was fortunate to find you and Matt and Jamie and Pat I and the solution that we're taking to market. At the time, we're taking it to the market with the investors that we have backing us. All of that created the perfect situation where I was happy to jump in and lend the entirety of my background to try to help contribute to the steepening of our growth curve.
So moving faster is risky. The faster you go, the more dangerous it can get. Driving, skiing, biking. You wanted more speed. You were willing to take that bigger risk. So you went big company to, I'll call it a startup. Now, though, it looks like you're trying to go even faster, or you are going even faster. So much faster that you want to be ahead of the curve of what those wonderfully successful people are saying in places like Davos. You're going to actually define that future because you see the opportunity more than just struggling to keep up, like with the larger historic organizations. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about where you see the world going. What are the opportunities going forward? And maybe, just maybe, would you like to share some news or some, I don't know, pending, recorded in advance, will probably be live by the time this goes out, but I don't know, maybe some changes to your professional ambitions, anything that you think should be moving faster?
Absolutely. And I am happy to be able to kind of break that news, I guess, here on the Defense Disrupted podcast as your guest, Ian. So thanks for the opportunity. And as listeners will hear or watchers will hear, there are multiple layers to the opportunities that, we've been able to jointly create together and that you help bring to me. So honored to be able to talk about that. I've got to go back from a storytelling perspective to a young Captain Vanzant as an Army infantry officer deployed to Iraq from 2005 to 6, which is now 20 years ago. Boggles the mind to do that math. We faced stiff opposition. We faced a rising insurgency. We faced weaponry and tactics that were actually coming in from neighboring countries that we have since taken to task and are actually in the process of threatening with direct strikes in the form of Iran. I can share that there were elements of their special operations forces, the Quds Force on the ground at the time. They were playing havoc on our formations, on our patrols, on our logistics trains, and lost a number of friends and colleagues that year, both killed in action and wounded in action. 19 dead. And they were killed, every one of them, by improvised explosive devices. And they were laid in very creative ways, very nefarious ways to do exactly what they did, which is cause catastrophic damage to U.S. material and manpower. And I'm watching conflicts around the world now. I'm supporting various forms of military operations in my reserve capacity. I'll tell you that what we did not face 20 years ago was IEDs that would fly into our laps and detonate catastrophically with a 5 to 15 meter kill radius, acting as a homemade precision guided munition. And that is exactly what military combatants, both sides of the battlefield, are facing today. So we don't have solutions for that. We do not have solutions for these small 3 to 5 kilogram payload weaponized racing drone that will fly into your lap and explode, taking out whatever's within that 5 to 15 meter radius. So that seems to me a solution. How do we solve that? That's the question we've been asking for the past, I think, several years as a Defense Department or Department of War, and as a community of businesses like ours that are agile and nimble enough to be able to create solutions for that. So fast forward, I guess, to the last 12 months, and early on, you and Matt Amaker, had talked to me about exploring the possibility of taking to market a leading technology that you had innovated and patented within TurbineOne. And the opportunity, as I think we described it, was a spin-out. So I'm happy to share with the world today that that spin-out has grown from an idea and a few brilliant innovations into a company. That company is called the Reconnaissance and Detection Device Company. That's a mouthful, so we're calling it RADCO, RADDCO. And we launched and have opened up our business with our 3 founding members. Actually, by the time this airs, I think we'll be up and running for a few months. We were in stealth mode for about 4 months and have, by the time this comes out, fingers crossed, closed our initial round of investment, and we're looking to grow at a very steep pace to fill that gap that the dismounted infantrymen, special operations soldiers, anyone on the ground operating as an individual has zero defense from those flying UAVs, those precision munitions, except for their literal eyes and ears. We need to do better. There are sensing capabilities out there that rely upon RF or radio frequency emanations. Those are easily mitigated and are completely obsolete if you fly either command wire with a fiber optic cable, or if you fly a pre-plotted route, or if you use the kinds of technologies that are now coming out for autonomous flight patterns. There will be no RF emanations, and those detection platforms are virtually useless for the Group 1 smaller UASs. The second method that's not as effective as it needs to be is radar. I don't think it's certainly not a secret to know if you fly below a certain altitude above ground level, you're below the radar effectiveness based on terrain masking. So the one signature that we have not seen our adversaries mitigate effectively is noise, sound. So we're focusing our sensor technology on the acoustic signature that is nearly impossible today to mitigate, and therefore is a known signal that we can detect and offer precious seconds of reaction time to our most vulnerable service members on the ground.
Wow. First, I want to start in response to the early part of your story. Thank you for sharing the difficult memory of the folks that you knew and worked with that you lost in combat. That's a typical thing to share, and thank you for sharing it here. I admire your conviction to fight that problem and clearly find solutions to the next generation of warfighters. I will also say congratulations on the crazy idea of being a CEO of a startup company. What a lunatic thing to do. But I admire anyone who is so risky and believes in it so much to do something so ridiculous. The next reflection is on the tech itself. A clear need, urgent, battlefield today. Folks, the right folks would stay alive if they had your technology today. And there's one other piece of your announcement that time-wise, I think you missed. Not only will you have funding a team and be charging forward in your new venture, you'll probably also have at least one customer, and I hope I'm it. So the product is going to be in the field, and I think my company would benefit from having a better sensor frontlines.
Well, we are ecstatic about that opportunity to partner, Ian. And again, Rad wouldn't be here were it not for the chance to have it incubated within and launched from TurbineOne.
This is just your way of raising the price of Rad. You're going to charge like a lot more in this now. I say, you butter me up. Okay, fine. I'll pay more for it. Okay. No, I appreciate that. Let's talk about the opportunity in front of you. So I hear the beachhead. I hear the technological gap. You mentioned acoustics and sound. I'm dialing into this podcast from a music studio, so obviously I care about such things and believe it to be true. And it's an obvious miss. It's something that The laws of physics will not be able to prevent that. But I can also see it expanding to other sensor types and modalities as time goes on, right? It seems obvious. So let's talk about how big this can get. One of the things I wish I knew when I started in the venture world is that the question all investors are asking themselves in the back of their minds is, are you going to make me $1 billion? Are you going to make me $1 billion? Are you going to make me? And if you're not, you're almost trying to get through the, wheat, separate the wheat from the chaff to figure out how big could this get. So while I completely see the battlefield urgency of that beachhead, how big will your company get? What is the market you're seeking to conquer?
Well, I love this question. It is the question central to the thesis behind launching RAD. Other than the fact there's a clear need, as you pointed out, how big is that need? That is the question. So let's run through some numbers just for fun. So the U.S. defense budget for the Department of War sits around, we'll call it a $1 trillion budget. Good news this week came out that the president is expecting and directing that budget to increase to $1.5 trillion. That's a 50% increase year over year of the top line budget. So of that, what does counter UAS, which is the broader category under which Radco's initial product offering will fall? Well, the smart math looks like that's a $35 billion TAM globally in US dollars. Within that, the military portables subsection of that is a $5 billion market. On top of that, the adjacent market of the scenario in which the US anyway has been very fortunate through a lot of hard work from law enforcement, interagency task forces, and diligent on-ground police work. We have not seen yet, and I pray that we don't, but the odds globally don't look good that we will forever avoid the domestic use of weaponized drones. I pray it doesn't happen. Everybody does. But the reality isn't money.
It's in the news, right? Like there's concerns about the Super Bowl and the World Cup and the Olympics. Like there's a broader recognition that a kid with a little extra time can do dangerous things, and we're not as a civilization prepared for that. It feels like a new asymmetric threat.
Precisely right. And so the TAM for the $30 billion civilian market is added to the top line of the $35 billion market. So I think, clearly, and what we're seeing, just to sort of not compare apples to oranges, but look, Drone Shield, an Australian company, is valued at over $1 billion today. So I think clearly this is $1 billion opportunity. The U.S. is screaming in need for sensors that are designed to help support the most vulnerable dismounted service members that are asked to carry out our nation's bidding and be the long arm of foreign policy. Again, across administrations, all of us who signed up to defend and uphold the Constitution. So this is an apolitical, nonpartisan issue that is about soldier safety, lethality, survivability, and frankly, the survivability of our allies and our friends and our countrymen where they're vulnerable, which is an increasingly wide attack surface when you look at the capability of UASs. And we're not sky is falling. Everything is not dire. The good news is there are technologies out there that safeguard against some of the larger UAS platforms, group 3 and above. And there's characterization of what that means and the size and weight and potential payload. We're focusing with laser-like precision on the group 1 small UAS and dismounted folks that are on foot. And so that's a market that is easily globally a $10 billion market. We aim to give existing incumbents an incredible run for their money, do that with manufacturing US-based product engineering and US first focus in terms of our Department of War being client number 1.
Brilliant. I want to ask you 2 founder startup questions. We've learned that when we publish these on LinkedIn, there's a lot of other entrepreneurs that watch this podcast. So I'm trying to listen to my audience. I'm going to try to give the folks what they're asking for. And there's a few questions I've received many times that I would love to hear your perspective on. One is on spinouts, which are weird and rare. Incubation is a chaotic world of data. So I want to bring more data to the table. And the second is hardware. Hardware is hard. And a lot of venture folks just run away from it the way they used to run away from national security and defense. So those are my final 2 questions for you before we hit the final mile here. So on spinouts and incubation, a lot of founders, I think, or those that are seeking, excited about entrepreneurship, don't know if they need to jump ship, go bankrupt, sell the house, and then go start the company, or if there's some other bridge way to do it. And I've seen a lot of those questions over my recent career. What's your reflection on it? Would you recommend incubation to another founder? What are the things that works out for when it can work and when it can't work? Any advice for other entrepreneurs that are seeking to imitate your bold move?
I love the question. I mean, look, my bold move, it's never about me. I am where I am in life because of the people that have poured into me, their expertise, their advice, their tough feedback. I think anybody starting out, seek and be rapidly focused on brutal candor and listen to those folks who are willing to give it to you, because it may not feel like it in the moment, but they are working actively to help you. If you take on those lessons, I think you become better faster, and you show the types of humility that I think would make you an attractive potential investment for others that have capital. I mean, there's no shortage of capital flying around the planet, something like $15 trillion globally. The tricky bit that I've heard and have come to understand is having the right combination of responsiveness, market focus, and vision, and then making sure that your product market fit is laser focused and dialed. And again, that came up for Rad in partnership with Turbine One, in partnership with Turbine One's earliest and most deeply committed investors. So this is a story of a network coming together to launch a product that will fill a clear gap in in the battlefield today.
But I think a lot of, at the risk of interrupting, I think a lot of veterans feel like that 15 trillion or whatever the, global capital market, I think they would feel it's pretty inaccessible. They don't know where to start. Just like I think a lot of, civilians don't know how to start thinking about what happened in Iraq and Iran 20 years ago. Like it's like outer space to a lot of folks. They don't know how to even connect and feel like, oh, that's a different world. That's not me. Or, do I just go to a website and fill out a form? Like how can you help demystify that first step of not feeling like it's an inaccessible blocker?
Well, this is going to be a tough message, but to the veterans out there that are in uniform looking to step out, people will be grateful that you've chosen to serve the country. They will express their gratitude verbally, and they will expect you to earn it in terms of the opportunities that they may expose to you. So earn it. Educate yourselves formally through MBA programs. That's the route I took. Deep believer in what that did in terms of broadening my aperture, giving me the tangible hard skills to be able to do the math and run a company, and also understand what it looks like to need to recruit and build a culture and do all the things you need to source supply chain and manufacturing capacity and access to capital. So it's not by accident that people find that those programs can be transformational, both in terms of the value of your network and the credentials that you get because you do onboard those hard skills. So education is foremost. Second, I think dogged determination to embrace the unknown. Folks that have chosen to serve are comfortable with risk to a degree, right? It varies, but generally that's a precondition. So get comfortable with risk in wading into the arenas that you're not sure what you might find. You're not sure what you may learn there or whether or not you have the right to be there, frankly. I hear a lot of guys and men and women complain about imposter syndrome. I get that. To me, that's an indicator that you're leaning in the right direction. If you feel like you've got everything mastered and you are comfortable, that to me again is a red flashing light that I'm in the wrong place. I think that that's another piece that is a paradigm shift perhaps of folks that have shown up and done a job and gotten a paycheck that's consistent, and arguably they're underpaid for the risks they take. But the risks in the business world look different. They're still palpable risks, and I think that the risk reward equation flips massively to those who are ready to take those risks from a position of being well trained and educated and experienced, and are willing to be very comfortable not being comfortable and pushing out towards the edges of their own potential. And in the process of doing that, continue to onboard new lessons learned, new information, new network, and new insights. So it's a combination of first principles approach. It's never enough. You keep climbing. You never know enough. There's always more to learn. Be comfortable staying hungry. And I think that the opportunities will come. Now, tactically, there are some phenomenal organizations out there that are willing to help veterans, and have proven over the years, decades now, that they're effective in doing that. Mil Vets is one. There are dozens of others. Maybe what we can do, Ian, is would be too much to expect that we link to a couple of those
I
resources.
can put a bunch of those links in here. We have complete control. Yeah.
I think that could be a pretty great service. And if folks see this and feel inspired or we stir something in them, I mean, I'm still a work far from finished, my friend. So this is a journey.
Yeah, this is the announcement. And the path to get you to this point, though, for those that had not done it, is itself like a exception to an exception. There are very few companies that make it to certain stages, right? The law of numbers is majority of startups fail. most folks don't be able to get through. It's very hard to break into national security. Most folks are not CEOs, entrepreneurs, right? By the numbers. So not only are you in that, I would say a special group, but the way you got here itself is unconventional from at least the stereotype story of, two folks in the garage with a dog who invent the Apple computer and then get funding from a random billionaire. Your path is less traditional. And so it's kind of an interesting outlier, what I'm getting at, that it has some interesting stories, and yet I still think it's one that is repeatable and approachable for others. I think that personally, more veterans could find ways into service, get that professional hard skills training, and follow your path. And I hope they do.
I hope they do. I hope they do, and I hope they reach out to both of us because, this is a bit of a pot calling the kettle black. Ian, you're a CEO yourself. You're a veteran. You are the reason that RAD is possible. So it's not a butter up. It's a recognition of fact.
Thank you.
And I think if anybody is curious about what it looks like to do what I'm doing and what the team's doing with RAD, conversation with Ian Kalen would be a great place to start.
Thank you for that. I will say while I'm still learning, I will confirm that I came to T1 through a similar path of incubation. I was working for something, thought I had a crazy idea, better idea came up, changed my life, went the other direction, called my wife and said, honey, I got a crazy idea. Someone just gave me this crazy idea. I think we should do it, right?
Very similar conversation on this end with my bride of, yes, 20 years.
I'm excited for you, Corey. Again, congratulations. And I hope you have the same amount of fulfillment and just the purpose that I have in my current job. And I know you already do. It is going to get even stronger in your new venture. Let me end the business question with one challenge. Hardware, what the hell are you thinking? Don't you know how expensive that is? Why the hell would you want to get a venture-backed hardware company? Isn't that too expensive?
You did ask that earlier. All right. This is a topic of some passion because over the last 40, let me just preface this with what I did in my prior role to joining TurbineOne was I focused on supply chain security, commercial intelligence, supply chain security software as a managed service that we took to market. What we saw was a woeful lack of US-based domestic manufacturing production and capacity. And it is a byproduct of 40 years of decisions that favored the global economy. It looked like a great idea when we had distributed supply chains that transited the globe and we could capitalize on arbitrage of labor, arbitrage of materials. We paid a little more in shipping, but it was all worthwhile in the end on the balance sheets for the operational expenses that were decreased by leveraging a global supply chain. And then we find out that human nature is dark in some ways, and it manifests with strategic plans that put nation states at odds with the interests of the Western world. In this day and age today, we're literally talking about the U.S. retrenching within the Western hemisphere to defend its interests on the continent because we are in a position of incredible socioeconomic and political tension with peer adversaries on the other side of the ponds that have a different worldview of what the new world order will look like in the coming decades. And that, you're a dad, I'm a dad, that affects us, that affects our children and their children. So deep commitment and deep passion on my end to reshore domestic manufacturing, production capacity, know-how, and engineering. There's all the intelligence we would want in terms of know-how. There's all the work ethic we want. I don't subscribe to the arguments that the American workers are not willing to take on great jobs that produce life-changing, life-saving products and put them to work, pay for their own families and their dreams. We can do that here. We can do that here again. We were the world's leader of automotive, high-end manufacturing. We still lead many markets in our innovation, high-end semiconductors. I mean, the list is so long. I won't hope to be able to drain it here. But the bottom line is, it may seem a contrarian play for venture capitalists, and I would argue, put some skin back in the game. Put some skin back in the game in our country. See what we can do. And so that's the thesis that RAD is based on, and we'll look to see how it proves out over time.
I would love to invest in life-saving technology. Unfortunately, I don't have that much cash, but I will challenge those that do to take that call to action. Those that answer the call are the ones that we ultimately want to be serving with in these difficult moments. Well, congrats again on RAD. I will say it is, in my mind, rather poetic that you are circling back to those early, distinguished technical days of Lean Six Sigma, which has its origin in efficient manufacturing. Lo and behold, it feels like you are the absolute best person to be leading this venture, given your unique life experiences in national security, in big business, and also that strategic global mindset of what ultimately we need to manufacture to keep the right folks safe. Like that is the clear connection in my mind between the product need and your experiences to build and deliver that capability. So congratulations. I'm excited for your new venture. I'm sad to see you leave Turbine One, but it like so many other great ventures, I have a hunch we're not going to be too far away from each other out in the field. So thank you, Court, for joining. Thank you for sharing the story. Thank you for honoring us with this announcement. I assume when this goes live, you've already shared it from a stage and we'll have, term sheets raining upon you by the time this goes out there. So maybe it's not so much an announcement for those listening, but it certainly is exciting for me to see it come to this wonderful breakthrough. So congratulations again, Court. Thanks for joining. And for those listening, please follow the links below if you are seeking your own startup journey, or perhaps looking to join a great startup itself. I have a hunch Brad will be hiring people in the not too distant future. So that by the time this goes live, there may be a apply here link, or at least to learn more. So to check those out. And again, Court, thanks so much for sharing your story.
Ian, an absolute pleasure. Happy to be here, truly serving the Lord and Savior and serving our country and serving others that put themselves in harm's way is my life's purpose. So truly a pleasure to spend time. Thank you so much for the platform and these sets of opportunities. Deeply grateful.